By the year 479 before the Common Era, the Persian invasion of Greece was supposed to be finished. Athens was a smoking ruin, its temples smashed and its streets deserted. A massive Persian army still sat comfortably in control of the Greek mainland, and on paper, the war was already decided. Commanding that force was Mardonius, one of Persia's sharpest generals, a man who seemed to have every advantage imaginable. He had overwhelming numbers. He had battle-hardened infantry. He had the most feared cavalry force the ancient world had ever seen, and he had chosen open ground that practically screamed Persian victory. Across from him stood a fragile, uneasy Greek alliance led by Sparta. They were outnumbered, outmatched on horseback, and painfully aware that a single mistake could wipe them off the map. For nearly 2 weeks, both armies faced each other near the town of Plataea, locked in a nerve-wracking stalemate. No glorious charges, no thunderous clashes, just heat, dust, thirst and pressure grinding everyone down. What happened next wouldn't be decided by raw strength, but by patience, positioning, and one catastrophic miscalculation. When the Persians finally moved to attack, they charged headfirst into the one formation designed to erase them from history, the Spartan phalanx. To understand how it reached this moment, you have to rewind 1 year earlier to 480 before the Common Era. That was when the Persian king Xerxes personally led a colossal invasion into Greece. The last stand of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae became legendary overnight. But the hard truth is this: it was still a loss. Athens fell soon after and was burned to the ground. The Persian war machine looked unstoppable. Then came Salamis. In the narrow straits, the Greek navy pulled off what can only be described as a miracle, smashing a much larger Persian fleet by forcing it to fight where numbers didn't matter. It was a turning point, but not the end. Xerxes, worried about supply lines and political threats back home, withdrew to Asia with much of his army. But he didn't abandon the campaign. Instead, he left the job to Mardonius, his trusted general and brother-in-law, and handed him the finest troops Persia had to offer. What Mardonius commanded was no leftovers force. Ancient writers loved exaggerating numbers, but modern estimates still place his army at around 100,000 men, an absolutely mind-blowing figure for the time. These weren't conscripts or second-rate soldiers. They were professionals, Persian immortals, Medes, Scythians, even thousands of Greek allies fighting against their own kind. This army had one mission and one mission only: finish Greece. Mardonius was so confident that when the Spartans hesitated to march north, he reoccupied Athens and finished destroying it, purely as a flex. The jewel of his force was its cavalry. Persian horsemen, part archers, part shock troops, were the nightmare scenario for Greek commanders. And Mardonius knew exactly what he was doing when he drew the Greeks down into the wide open plains near Plataea. This was cavalry country. Here his horsemen could harass, outflank, and control the pace of battle however they wanted. The Greeks, meanwhile, had almost no cavalry at all. For a hoplite army, this was as bad as it gets. On paper, it looked hopeless. Mardonius believed the Greeks were trapped, outmaneuvered, and slowly being herded toward annihilation. Standing on the hills overlooking the sprawling Persian camp, it must have felt like Greece was staring straight into an unwinnable war. Leading this shaky alliance was the Spartan regent Pausanias, nephew of the legendary Leonidas. The weight on his shoulders was unreal. Spartan honor, Greek survival, and the future of the entire region rested on his decisions. Forget the stereotype of Spartans as brainless brawlers. Pausanias was sharp, disciplined, and brutally patient. He understood his army inside and out, especially its greatest strength and its greatest weakness, the hoplite phalanx. To grasp the nightmare Pausanias was dealing with, you have to understand how the phalanx worked. It wasn't just a formation, it was a system. A dense block of heavy infantry, usually 8 ranks deep, every man armored in bronze, helmet, breastplate, greaves. But the real power came from 2 things, the spear and the shield. The spear, called the dory, stretched 7 to 9 feet long. The shield, the aspis, was a massive 3-foot disc of wood and bronze, designed to protect not just the soldier holding it, but the man standing beside him. Locked together, those shields formed a solid wall. The front ranks lowered their spears over the top, creating a forest of iron points. When a phalanx advanced, it wasn't a charge. It was a slow, crushing machine, grinding everything in front of it into the dirt. But here's the brutal catch. That insane frontal power came at a steep price. The phalanx was slow, it was rigid, and it was terrifyingly vulnerable on the sides and rear. Packed shoulder to shoulder, Hoplites couldn't just turn to face a new threat. A unit of horse archers could ride along the flank and rain arrows into exposed flesh. A cavalry strike from behind would cause instant chaos, snapping the formation and turning disciplined warriors into a panicked crowd. And that, right there, was the exact problem staring Pausanias in the face. Pausanias knew the math was brutal. If he allowed Mardonius to fight the kind of battle he wanted, a fast, fluid engagement across open plains, his phalanxes would be wrapped, flanked, and erased. There would be no heroic last stand, just collapse. Everything Pausanias planned revolved around one core idea: neutralize Persia's greatest advantage. That meant forcing the fastest cavalry on earth to fight where speed didn't matter, where horses couldn't dominate, and where discipline could outlast mobility. So the battle didn't explode into motion. It stalled. What followed was not a clash of blades, but an 11-day war of patience. A staring contest stretched under the sun, heavy with tension. Pausanias made the first critical move, and it was a refusal. He flatly rejected every attempt to lure the Greeks down into the open plain where Mardonius had set his camp. That ground was a death trap, tailor-made for Persian horsemen. Instead, Pausanias anchored the Greek army. Modern estimates place it at roughly 80,000 men along the broken high ground on the slopes of Mount Citharon. That single choice flipped the entire battlefield. Cavalry hates uneven terrain. Hills disrupt formations, slow charges, and kill momentum. On top of that, attacking uphill while wearing armor drains energy fast. Mardonius understood the problem immediately. Charging a fortified Greek phalanx uphill would be suicide. So both armies waited. Days passed. Then more days. The silence was broken only by sudden violence. Mardonius unleashed his cavalry in aggressive hit-and-run attacks, probing the Greek lines, looking for weakness. In one famous clash, the Persian cavalry commander Mecistius personally led a strike against the Megarian contingent. The Megarians took a beating and called for support. Pausanias responded instantly, sending Athenian hoplites and archers into the fight. In the chaos that followed, Mecistius was thrown from his horse and killed. It was a massive psychological blow to the Persians and a huge morale boost for the Greeks. But Pausanias didn't celebrate. He didn't chase. He didn't move. He held his ground. Mardonius held his. The Greeks controlled the hills, the Persians controlled the plain and the nearby city of Thebes. Mardonius believed time was working in his favor. He assumed the Greek alliance would crack, or their supplies would run dry. The battlefield had turned into a slow-burning chess match. There's a popular myth that Greek armies were nothing but solid blocks of hoplites. At Plataea, that misunderstanding would have been fatal. Pausanias knew better. He understood combined arms warfare. A significant portion of his force wasn't heavy infantry at all. Many modern historians believe a large share of the Greek army consisted of lightly armed troops, the Siloi. These were skirmishers armed with javelins, slings, and bows, men who couldn't afford bronze armor, but made up for it with speed and flexibility. The Athenians, in particular, brought a crucial unit of archers. These troops were Pausanias's counter to Persian missile dominance. Persian doctrine revolved around archery. They often planted large wicker shields in the ground, creating firing platforms designed to shred enemy formations before close combat ever began. Pausanias knew his hoplites could absorb arrows, for a while, but not indefinitely. So the light infantry became a living shield. They moved ahead of the phalanxes, harassing Persian archers, disrupting cavalry approaches, and denying the Persians the clean firing lines they needed. This layer of the battle is often ignored, but it was absolutely critical. While the hoplites stood firm on the hills, these lighter troops fought non-stop skirmishes along the Asopus River. They proved their value in the clash that killed Mecistius, helping drive back elite Persian cavalry. Pausanias wasn't just reacting, he was shaping the battlefield. He understood that to unleash the full power of the phalanx, he first had to protect it. After more than a week, Mardonius finally grew restless. The waiting game wasn't breaking the Greeks. If anything, it was strengthening them as more allies arrived. The stalemate had failed, so Mardonius shifted gears. If he couldn't force a decisive battle through maneuver, he would do it through exhaustion. He changed his strategy from positioning to attrition, and that decision would push the campaign toward its breaking point. Mardonius went back to the weapon he trusted most, but this time, he used it with precision. The cavalry wouldn't smash headfirst into Greek shields anymore. Instead, he unleashed them on a wide, sweeping raid that curved around the Greek army and vanished into the mountain passes behind them. Those narrow routes were the Greeks' lifeline, and the Persians hit them hard. The raid was devastating. Persian horsemen intercepted and destroyed a massive supply convoy, wiping it out completely. In an instant, the high ground that had kept the Greeks safe turned into a cage. An army can't fight on pride alone. Hunger doesn't care about courage. 2 days later, Mardonius twisted the knife even deeper. This time, the target wasn't food, it was water. The entire Greek army depended on a single fresh source, the Gargantuan spring tucked safely behind their lines, or so they thought. In a bold and ruthless maneuver, Persian cavalry slipped behind the Greek position, fought their way to the spring, and cut it off. Whether they fouled the water or simply turned it into a killing zone with arrows didn't matter. The result was the same. The Greeks' only reliable source of water was gone. That was checkmate. The hills that once protected them now trapped them. The terrain that gave them an advantage was about to starve and dehydrate them into surrender. Thirst set in. Supplies vanished. Morale cracked. Pausanias couldn't stay, but attacking was still impossible. Mardonius had outplayed him. The stalemate was over. With disaster closing in, Pausanias made the call no Spartan leader ever wanted to make. He ordered a withdrawal. The plan itself was solid. Under cover of darkness, the army would pull back to a new position near the town of Plataea. The location, known as the island, offered better protection, and most importantly, access to fresh water. A nighttime movement was the only way to avoid being ripped apart by Persian cavalry. But planning a withdrawal and executing one are two very different things, especially when you're dealing with tens of thousands of soldiers from a dozen rival city-states. And that night, everything unraveled. It started with a problem Pausanias never expected, a stubborn Spartan officer named Amompharetus. He flat out refused to move. To him, any retreat was cowardice, a stain on Spartan honor. Pausanias spent hours locked in argument, trying to reason with his own commander while the clock burned away. The delay shattered the timeline. Meanwhile, the Greek center, made up largely of Corinthians and other allies, began withdrawing in the dark, but completely lost their bearings. Instead of falling back to the island, they retreated all the way to Plataea itself, far beyond the planned position. They were now completely out of the fight. As dawn broke, the situation was a nightmare. Pausanias finally convinced Amompharetus to move and began pulling the Spartans and their Tegean allies off the ridge. On the far left, the Athenians saw movement and started their own withdrawal. But there was no coordination, no cohesion. Instead of a solid new battle line, the Greek army was scattered across the landscape. Spartans on the right, Athenians on the far left, and a massive gaping void where the center should have been. It didn't look like a controlled maneuver. It oaked like exactly what Mardonius had been waiting for, a panicked, disorganized rout. From his camp, Mardonius watched the sun rise over pure chaos. The Greek center was gone. The flanks were separated and drifting away from each other, wide open and exposed. After 11 days of patience and pressure, he believed the moment had finally arrived. And that's when he made the fatal assumption. He looked at the scattered movement and convinced himself it was a full-scale collapse. In his mind, the Greek alliance had finally broken. The battle was already over. All that remained was the chase. Throwing away all previous caution, Mardonius ordered a general assault. He didn't wait for archers. He didn't wait for cavalry. He sent his elite infantry straight across the river, charging hard after the supposedly fleeing Spartans. Caught up in his own confidence, he personally led the attack at the head of his best troops. It was a bold gamble, a move meant to turn retreat into annihilation. But in his rush to deliver the final blow, Mardonius had just stepped into a deadly trap. The Spartans weren't running, not even close. And Mardonius, in a fatal rush of confidence, was driving his lighter, more flexible infantry straight into an uphill, close-quarters brawl against the most lethal heavy infantry on Earth. He had dominated the strategic game from start to finish, but in the final moment, he played directly into his enemy's hands. Thousands of elite Persian soldiers splashed across Asopus River and surged up the slopes, convinced the Greeks were breaking. Arrows darkened the sky, and a massive opening volley meant to shatter morale and turn retreat into panic. But the Spartans didn't scatter. At Pausanias's command, they stopped, turned, locked shields, leveled spears. The Tegeans formed beside them, steel pressed to steel, transforming the hillside into an unbreakable wall. According to Herodotus, Pausanias paused for a tense heartbeat, performing final sacrifices while the Tegeans, unable to hold back, charged ahead. When the omens finally turned favorable, Pausanias gave the order, and the Spartan phalanx surged forward to meet the Persians head-on. What followed was the moment that decided the war. The Persians fought bravely. Many wore linen armor and carried wicker shields, built for speed and missile warfare. The Spartans were built for something else entirely, the grind. When the lines slammed together, the difference was immediate and savage. Greek spears were longer, their shields heavier, bronze armor turned aside arrows and blades alike. The disciplined shove of the phalanx began forcing the Persians backward, step by brutal step, down the hill. Herodotus tells us the Persians fought with desperate courage, grabbing Spartan spears with bare hands, snapping shafts, dropping bows and pulling daggers in a last-ditch attempt to break through. It didn't work. The turning point came when Mardonius himself was spotted in the fight, mounted and surrounded by his elite guard. In the chaos, he was struck down and killed. Herodotus credits the blow to a Spartan named Orimnestus. The effect was instant and catastrophic. The Persian command structure collapsed, their attack driven by Mardonius's personal will unraveled on the spot. What had been an assault turned into panic. The Persian line shattered, and the battle became a rout. Across the field, the Athenians crushed their pro-Persian Theban opponents. The victory was total. Persian survivors fled back to their fortified camp, but safety was an illusion. The Greeks stormed the wooden defenses, poured inside, and slaughtered the trapped leaderless soldiers by the thousands. The Battle of Plataea was over, and it was decisive. Xerxes' invasion died on that field. Never again would a Persian king attempt a full-scale conquest of the Greek mainland. The shadow that had hung over the Hellenic world was finally gone. Plataea stands as a masterclass in warfare. Pausanias, facing a superior enemy and crippling disadvantages, refused to play his opponent's game. He used terrain to neutralize cavalry. He endured a logistical nightmare that would have broken a lesser commander. And most importantly, he turned a moment of near disaster into the perfect trap. What looked like a collapse was bait, and Mardonius took it. The battle proved that disciplined, heavily armored infantry, led with Patti, NCE and intelligence, could defeat a larger, faster, more mobile force. The Persians learned that lesson the hard way. In the years that followed, when they needed elite infantry, they hired Greek hoplite mercenaries, the ultimate admission that the system which destroyed them was superior. The victory secured the independence of Greece. It allowed its culture to survive, to evolve, and to lay the foundations of what would eventually become Western civilization. This wasn't just a triumph of shields and spears. It was a victory of discipline over speed, strategy over arrogance, and the brilliant mind of a Spartan commander who waited for the perfect moment to strike.